Ever feel like everything's getting more expensive? Groceries, rent, even breathing. And let's not forget car insurance. It just keeps creeping up. But here's the thing. Insurify makes one part of life easier. It's an insurance comparison site that finds real-time quotes from dozens of top insurers. Insurance companies compete for your business, driving down prices. It's like having a friend who knows all the best deals, but without the smug grin. You could save as much as $1,025 a year, and you might even cut your bill in half. The best part, it's all online. No phone calls, no spam, no nonsense. You can be covered in as little as 10 minutes, and with an excellent star rating on Trustpilot, saving feels less impossible. So why not give it a shot? Visit Insurify.com and see how much you can save. That's INSURIFY.com. Average potential savings based on initial quotes received by 183,234 customers seeking insurance through Insurify. Actual savings may vary depending on state of residence, individual circumstances, coverage selections, and insurance provider. Savings results are not guaranteed. As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy nerds, every bite of Nerds Gummy Clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds Gummy Clusters.
The Athletic.
When KTM's 2025 MotoGP launch date came through, we were thinking this will be a quiet one. In the middle of that crisis, not going to make a lot of fanfare. There'll just be some pictures, maybe a press release, that'll be the lot. But no, KTM put up its entire 4-rider lineup, both team managers and motorsport boss Pit Beirer, to meet the media while unveiling the new bike and the other new bike that looks exactly the same in Tech 3's new livery. This is the Race MotoGP podcast. It's just another two-hander with me, Matt Beer, and Val Khorounzhiy. Simon and Val haven't been on the same podcast for a while. We are still friends. It's just launch season is a bit non-stop. There's a lot going on. Simon is on a plane to Thailand right now as me and Val are recording this. So, Val, you and Simon were very tidy last time without me, so I'm hoping that I can live up to the standard you set for organisation and discipline last time.
Right.
This should be fine. Val, you had a very full-on day listening to it. It turned out to be hours of media sessions with KTM people. Now, it was a weird one because every single session of the first batch of, 6, all started with a KTM press officer saying, please don't ask anything about the gigantic financial elephant in the room, but adding Pit Beirer. We'll speak about this later. So about 7 hours into your day, we were all thinking, right, okay, it's pit time. Let's go with the questions. And he didn't hang back, did he? It was a pretty revealing session for a man who's been at the centre of basically trying to keep the whole KTM project afloat through these crazy months.
Which is sort of what I've come to expect from Pit Beirer personally. I mean, this is not the first session I've done with him. I haven't done so many, but I've done a handful, and they've always, he's always happy to talk and happy to answer questions, and even when they're difficult, happy to tackle them. And he's been very, very good again this time. Very interesting to listen to, very interesting to ask him questions. Of course, before that, there were, as he said, 6 other sessions, which all began with the wording. I even wrote it down. Thank you in advance for understanding that we cannot speak on behalf of Pure Mobility AG and then something don't ask business related questions, basically.
Yes.
And the fact is that several different PRs read out that exact wording. So
yeah.
Not a huge surprise that was something very clearly agreed in advance. The phrasing slightly surprised me because it's not just pure Mobility AG that has the problems. Obviously, KTM AG is the insolvent company, I think.
Well, and also that wording, if you take it at literal face value and you were going to be cheeky with it, you'd go, well, I'm not going to ask Pedro Acosta to speak on behalf of Peirer Mobility. I'm going to ask Pedro Acosta to speak on behalf of himself as a young rider who wants a job and to win championships. But you and your colleagues, very well behaved with the questions you asked.
We'll get to that later. But yes, that sort of question phrasing did happen multiple times. And to KTM's credit, no pushback on that front. You know, the rules of engagement were clearly outlined, and I think quite respected by everybody involved. You know, we're not unreasonable. We also understand that there was an alternate scenario where KTM just points to the fact that no money and doesn't do any media in the lead up. Yeah. And we just have to shrug our shoulders and go, well, unusual situation. So I would find it.
If KTM had done, like we said in the intro, had just done a press release and a picture of some Red Bull covered bikes, and that had been a lot. We earlier this week we said our next podcast would be a kind of joint Honda and Yamaha thing, because we weren't expecting KTM to actually give us enough to work with at this point. We thought, okay, we've talked about their financial situation enough. So the fact they did a whole day of interviews was absolutely mega, and in their circumstance, massively appreciated. But yeah, Pit Beirer gave a fairly honest rundown of the situation, and we've had a few months where the question has been more about, would KTM even be there in 2025 initially, or was this a guaranteed final year? Was the exit inevitable? Was there a development freeze? Was it going to be a sort of ghost year with an undeveloped bike and increasingly unhappy riders on the way out? But Beirer's stance was very much, no, this is, as far as we can, this is business as usual.
Yeah, the position from, obviously the position from the KTM racing department, which Pit Beirer is a representative of, would be that there's no KTM, well, not that there's no KTM with that racing, although I think that's implied, but that racing, you know, it doesn't just exist for racing's sakes, it exists to sell motorcycles, and, you know, it's not a vanity project. As I often say, it's not something that's easily expendable because it's such an important part of the whole marketing structure. And from Pit Beirer's position today, at least like the way he conveyed it, that sounds like it's an opinion shared not just by the current KTM leadership, which did change recently, as we mentioned before. There's a new CEO, but the old CEO, Stefan Peirer, obviously still on hand to help out. But it's the position of the current people in charge of the self-administration process. And I mean, he didn't say, but going by the general vibe of optimism, it might be a position of a significant amount of potential investors and or creditors. So the important date is February 25th. That's when the current restructuring plan, as a result of the self-administration process, will go up to, if I understand correctly, a creditor vote will either be approved or declined. And obviously, creditors, or, you know, people who are owed whatever, people who need to be paid, are the ones who are right now most interested in getting the biggest return on the dollar that they put in there. And the whole, maybe the whole decision lies in their hands in a way, because it's a question of whether they believe the restructuring plan that will be in place will be able to bring him the most euro compensation to what's already in there and what's already sort of in debt, because there is probably still a scenario in which those creditors just ask for the money that is there right now, and then there's no KTM.
Yeah,
I think that's an undertone of this whole prospect, obviously, but it doesn't sound like that's as feared an outcome as maybe it was in the earlier stages of this process.
Yeah, I mean, a few months ago when it was literally this scary multi-billion number, you look at that on paper and you go, well, obviously racing is going to be chopped. But as more details came out, it's not to a point where racing is bringing in money specifically. It's more the kind of PR value of it. But the racing program is not the thing that is actually burning most of the money in this situation. That has been some of the expansion misadventures KTM did in its wider brands and its cycling as well. But also, this is not, we see a lot of manufacturers drop their motorsport programs when they're in trouble and their motorsport programs aren't going well, and an obvious waste of money. But KTM is on the cusp here, and with Pedro Acosta in the main team now, with this sort of so strong strength in depth lineup coming in. We're taking Tech 3 even more seriously. When KTM announced in, I think it was May, wasn't it, that it brought in Maverick Vinales and Nea Bastianini, we were on this podcast saying no other manufacturer has this level of strength in depth across its whole lineup. No other manufacturer can look at its lineup and go, yeah, any of those guys could win at some point this weekend. Even Maverick Vinales, he won't be 17th, but he might win. Those are your two scenarios. So there should be, if you'd sort of hibernated through the winter, because most of this stuff broke during the off season, and you looked at KTM at the end of last season competitiveness wise, looked at who was coming in and what they were doing with the team structure, you'd go, yeah, this is going to be a great season. You can't count out Aprilia with Jorge Martin, but in terms of the manufacturer itself, KTM feels like the one that's got the better shot at Ducati, and has got the long-term hope with Acosta as well. There's so much going for this, apart from the elephant in the room of the entire company being in jeopardy. So,
I mean, the important thing in regards to that is all of the messaging from today, to varying degrees of convincingness, has been that the 2025 season, both the start of the 2025 season and what will come later, has not been compromised. And of course, that again depends on February 25th, and that depends on the restructuring plan being greenlit. But the suggestion from Pit Beirer in particular is that there is an acute understanding that, firstly, for KTM's presence on the grid to have any value, it has to be competitive, it has to be the best possible version, which always means spending all the money you can spend on the development. So the cuts that they have made, it certainly sounds like there has been every effort to ensure that those cuts are not on the performance level, which, I mean, at that point, you then start to ask, well, should those cuts have been in there all along? Because aren't you a racing team that wants to race, etc., blah, blah, blah. But that's way too simplistic of a way to look at it, I guess. But the messaging is, so the bikes, are long built. All the stuff that's been built had a huge lead time. Pit Beirer said that they got lucky with timing in terms of when the company stock really plummeted and the debt became public knowledge, obviously, and became what it became. He's saying that, because by that point, the foundation of the 2025 MotoGP program was already in place. And right now, what they've just needed to do is present a plan to make sure that program, gets over the line and is allowed to stay competitive through the season. And there are certain factors, a number of factors that make that possible, even in the current situation. One of those factors is the engine freeze, which is coming in. The engines will be homologated now for the full 2025 season. They also cannot be changed in 2026. So, the homologation period will cover 2 years unless you're one of the really struggling manufacturers, which KTM is not. KTM does not have a huge glaring engine issue. So it can develop elsewhere. Obviously, there's clearly a lot still for KTM to develop because it was not the best bike on the grid last season. None of us are fooling ourselves that it was. But because of that, you can sort of see how you can still spend what you need to spend and still be as good as you were going to be because of those moving pieces around it. Because as Beirer also revealed, the driver behind the engine freeze was KTM. KTM was the first party interested. Then he said, then Ducati also agreed to it, which, I mean, by the way, huge shock that the two manufacturers of the great engines are the ones happy to freeze the engines. So the timelines aren't fully clear in my head, but basically, I think at the moment that there were the first seeds of realization at KTM that, this is not going the right way for us financially, is also, whether by coincidence or by necessity, was also the moment that, Beirer really started to advocate for the engine freeze, also because it is a financially sound thing for MotoGP. As he put it, you can sort of save the exact amount of money that you would need to then invest in an all-new engine for 2027 by doing this.
Yeah, it is handy timing. Obviously, the engine development isn't everything. There's still other things to spend money on, but they can make an argument if they're having to justify the program as part of the restructure. They can make the argument that the money they're spending now might be, to quite a large degree, the only money they need to spend for a little while. And it's certainly, there was a lot of talk over the winter of development freeze and the bike turning up at Sepang in the same spec, but whether everything was already so far in the pipeline that the financial problems haven't been relevant for that, or whether that was just a little bit misleading. All the riders sound very confident they've got a lot to be playing with when they get to Sepang. And when they actually start in the shakedown.
Yeah, we should say that in the shakedown, both the KTM test riders will be present for all 3 days, and that both Pedro Acosta and Brad Binder attested to the fact that there should be a lot of new stuff to try out. And yeah, so at least, definitely for the start of the season, we're going to get a full tilt, usual KTM thing of, truckloads of parts and that kind of situation.
And also, like, if you've got Danny Pedrosa and Pol Espargaro turning up to do your shakedown test for you, that is not going to be, relatively speaking, that's not a small set of salaries, is it, for a test driver?
That is an interesting point, and it's an interesting part of the wider point that I think we will get to slightly later. But there is a slight incongruence existing between the talk of the factory cutbacks, the amount of factory riders across disciplines being significantly reduced, which represents the big amount of savings. All the programs having a little bit or a lot shaved off just to support the top, and obviously as part of this KTM strategy, bringing everything under the KTM umbrella instead of promoting Husqvarna, GasGas, your sister brands. So reducing the amount of riders, reducing the amount of programs, but you're about to wheel out in KTM a 4-man lineup with 4 riders who are not the cheapest riders on the grid, I would imagine. I mean, I don't know. I have not seen their contracts, but just their pedigree suggests they will not be the cheapest riders on the grid. Combining that with 2 of the best, most pedigreed test riders on the grid. I mean, Danny Pedrosa speaks for himself, but also I think Pol Espargaro is a guy who, given the recency of his performance and the fact that he's, achieved a decent amount of MotoGP, would be a very coveted sort of test rider. There's still a lot about KTM's program that screams opulence, basically.
Well, yeah, if you said your race lineup even now was Pedrosa and Espargaro, you'd go, well, that should be all right. There's some podiums in that. Even at Pedrosa's age now, as he's shown in his wildcards. The other element, though, is, okay, the freeze means you get through 2025, 26, okay. But Pit Beirer was even talking about the massive investment for the new rules in 2027 as being a thing that KTM is actively considering. Now, even in our more optimistic takes on what was happening, I think we were fairly sceptical that there was any way that the team could, A, be seen to be committing to 2027 right now, and it's in the company's financial situation, and B, if it's going to wait for things to progress and then get there eventually, would it lose so much ground in preparation relative to the rivals who can crack on right now? Sounds like they're doing everything they can right now, which is hugely encouraging.
Well, yeah, losing ground is obviously an acute concern. I think, to be fair, I think it might sound a little tone deaf, for instance, to be speaking about 2027 these situations, but I think it's fair to put the cards on the table as much as you can in this process. I mean, ultimately, there's a difference to what you do in MotoGP if you expect to stick around for the next rule set or you don't. And as Beirer put it, their current situation there is, obviously there's no Dorna contract, because nobody has a Dorna contract yet for 2027. There's no full set of regulations yet, so you cannot build hardware. You can't have a physical bike on the shop floor, or God forbid going testing or whatever. But what you can do right now is still, have engineers working on concepts, and that's still going on. That still has not, well, not still, I shouldn't say still, because they don't plan to necessarily pause it, but that has not been paused. That's still ongoing, because obviously I'm sure that there is a keen awareness there that you cannot sacrifice any of the lead time right now that you have, because I imagine a lot of the KTM program still feels that not entering the previous big regulation cycle at the same time as everybody else did, but being a new manufacturer for that, is still something they're maybe somewhat paying the price for, even that long down the line. We know, I mean, momentum's nonsense, I guess, but momentum as not a concept of mental whatever, etc., but momentum is just the idea of built-in knowledge and built-in experience that you're then building upon, and how to overcome that clearly is a very major thing in modern MotoGP, more so than ever before, for riders and for manufacturers.
I think as well, in this particular set of circumstances, looking at the last 10 years, you don't want to give a Gigi Dall'Igna run Ducati organisation a head start, because everyone is playing catch up to what Ducati did going into this era, effectively. I did think Beirer was being slightly disingenuous. I could see where he was coming from when he was saying no one's got a Dorna contract, the regs aren't out yet. I was just thinking, yeah, that's technically correct. none of your rival manufacturers are having a massive enforced restructuring program and have been in the news for €3 billion euros of debt over the winter, so it's not quite the same, but
absolutely.
Yeah, he is technically also correct. But
we should say that also another slightly surprising bit was, Simon had the story about MotoGP, Moto3, the lower class potentially becoming a single manufacturer class from, I don't remember the year today, what Beirer said in the discussions, 2027 or 2028. And Beirer outlined the reasons for why that might be, which long and short of it is, Honda and KTM are going nuts in terms of the development rates, and it's not necessarily sustainable or healthy for either company or for the championship, even though the championship is ultimately in root health as a result. But clearly that is being discussed on the table. What is interesting, maybe logical, but it did sort of surprise to hear the openness, is that KTM, even in its current situation, is still willing to at least publicly throw its hat into the ring.
Yeah.
Like, if you want a single manufacturer, we could still be that, which for me betrays a certain level of confidence in the future of the company. Obviously, Moto3 program would be much more of a tangible return on investments. It's like an actual business, whereas MotoGP is just marketing in a sense. But yeah, it was interesting to hear.
Yeah, completely. Because when that story first broke, there was a degree of, okay, that's obvious because one manufacturer that's supporting this championship heavily might not even be there. But because at that point, it seemed certain that it was only a matter of time before KTM would be out of MotoGP. And then if your flagship bit of motorsport's gone, you couldn't really imagine KTM going back to its old situation of being kind of the kingpin of the junior classes, but not having the top level. But maybe that is viable. Maybe. I don't know. Certainly, from your side, Val, having listened to all the KTM people through the course of Thursday, do you come out of that day with a different stance on what KTM's future looks like than you had before it, with the kind of the big spectre of this February 25th deadline for the restructuring still sort of hanging there waiting to maybe torpedo everything if the votes there go the wrong way? I
do come out different. I am easily swayed. I want to put that front and center. I am genuinely very
in life.
In life, yeah. I'm very trusting of what people send me. And I know I'm about to get 15 million emails from the wallet inspector or whatever, the credit card inspector. Please don't do that. But yeah, I tend to trust what people say, and I tend to trust my own read of how they came across. And it felt reasonably confident. Also, just the fact that you would put Beirer out there for, it was like 40 minutes. Yeah. And actually, it was 40 minutes that was actually like 70 minutes because he had a technical issue 5 minutes in and then couldn't rejoin the call for a considerable amount of time.
Well, this is it as well. Like if he'd been looking to get out of it, he had every excuse there where he just had no internet for quite a long time. Yeah. Cue lots of jokes about whether they'd pay for the Wi-Fi, which not in good taste. We wouldn't do that.
Would never.
Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
I use the New York Times Games app every single day.
I love playing Connections.
With Connections, I need to twist my brain to see the different categories.
I think I know this connection. Look, Bath is a city in England, Sandwich is a city in England, Reading is a city in England, and I'm going to guess Derby is a city in England.
I started Wordle 194 days ago, and I haven't missed a day.
The New York Times Games app has all the games right there.
I absolutely love Spelling Bee. I always have to get Genius.
I've seen you yell at it and say that should be a word.
Totally should be a word.
Sudoku is kind of my version of lifting heavy weights at the gym.
At this point, I'm probably more consistent with doing the crossword than brushing my teeth.
When I can finish a hard puzzle without pins, I feel like the smartest person in the world.
When I have to look up a clue to help me, I'm learning something new.
It gives me joy every single day.
Start playing in the New York Times Games app.
You can download it at nytimes.com/games app.
So we spent all day waiting for Pit Beirer to actually be allowed to speak on behalf of Pira Mobility AG. Before that, we had Pedro Acosta, Brad Binder, Ania Bastianini, Maverick Vinales, new factory team boss Aki Ajo, and Tech 3 team manager Nicolas Goyon, all speaking about their winters, but being a little bit careful. Well, journalists like yourself, Val, were being quite careful with how you asked what you were asking, throwing in a few kind of easy balls in there as well, but also just trying to get a little bit of a sense of how everyone was really feeling about stuff. From what I heard of those interviews, it was quite a convincing set of answers. It wasn't like people were kind of just completely snubbing your questions. It did seem like the riders had, maybe you expect this for riders with their level of focus and single-mindedness, but the riders had kind of gone, well, this isn't my problem right now. If this is going to fall apart, that's my manager's problem to sort down the line. I trust in myself that someone else will want me who's good. I'm just going to get on focused on 2025. Pedro Acosta sounded particularly strong on that front.
Yeah, but it is also Pedro Acosta, and it's none of these guys' first rodeo in one sense or another of, finding ways to talk and fill time about things that you don't really want to talk about too earnestly is obviously a very important skill for a MotoGP rider. I think my awareness that the KTM team in MotoGP is probably the closest we have in MotoGP to like an F1-like operation with an above-average control of messaging coming out from its riders. I would be extremely shocked if there wasn't a conversation with every single one of them at some point going into that launch day of, okay, if approximately this is asked, etc., this is how I'd steer it. And maybe Pedro Acosta didn't even need that necessarily because he has no trouble coming out with the usual, like, none of my issues. I'm here to race. It's fine. Brad Binder's particularly good at redirecting everything into sort of, focus on the track, good of the company, etc. Always does a very good job for KTM in that regard. I also said this anecdote on the video, so I'm reusing material. Apologies. There's only so much room in my head after multiple hours of listening to KTM people and then trying not to forget what they told me. But
also as much as I hope that podcast listeners are also enjoying the fact we have a MotoGP YouTube channel on the race now, I do think there's enough difference between people who might just watch us and people who might just listen to us. People might just even read us.
Yeah.
So apologies if you do all three and you're finding us a bit repetitive. Bear in mind it's been a very long day for Val, and he had his hair cut recently, as you might have noticed if you're watching on the YouTube channel. I think, is it Samson whose power was in his hair?
Oh,
I can't remember. Anyway,
deep cut. Well, not that deep, I guess, but I don't know, so deep enough for me. But yeah, so I asked Maverick Vinales, basically the most inoffensive version of, has this whole situation seems to have motivated you a bit to give KTM your best, because it looks like you really want to rally the company that's not having such a good time, and the staffers who might be worried about the future of the company. It really seems like you want to rally them around you. And his answer was more, not a good time. What are you talking about? KTM just won the Dakar Rally, it's won the AMA Supercross opener. We're all right. We're doing good. And we just need to win in MotoGP too. So different approaches to acknowledging the financial realities of KTM. But look, if Vinales is in the right here, if KTM's biggest items on the agenda is the Dakar Rally with Daniel Sanders and the win in the Supercross opener, then good for them. Sounds good.
Yeah, he did sound particularly perky, Maverick Vinales. He did say something along the lines of that he was confident his single lap pace was good as well, which came as a shock.
What are you talking about? Vinales' single lap pace is legit. I would not hear that. Vinales' single lap pace is awesome.
Yeah, that is the one element though exactly that you can count on. Yeah, he did allude to the fact that maybe the other bits were where he needs to do some work. The other thing that I'd liked from Vinales' interview as well, which as the in-house Vinales advocate / super fan / endlessly patient loyalist,
self-administrator.
Yeah, he did mention that this is, he's in satellite team land now, so would have to be doing less development work, and he felt like this might actually do him a favour in terms of not having just being able to just worry about himself, not try to be developing a bike as well. I was a little bit skeptical about that theory. How do you feel about that?
Good spot, Matt, because that caught my ear as well. It's a break in messaging, because the rest of the day's messaging was that Tech 3 and all of its riders and all of its staff are on the same level exactly as all the KTM staff, that there is no meaningful difference between the Works KTM team and the Tech 3 team, and that part of that message, as you could see through the launch, is that the bikes are goddamn identical.
Yes, very.
You will no longer be able to tell them apart. I know we've had that in the lower classes before, but it'll still be quite something. Just a cue to you if listeners haven't looked at the two bikes yet. Basically, memorize the oil suppliers.
Yeah,
so one of them's red and one of them's white, and that's going to be the difference between the bike brandings, because otherwise the liveries are completely identical, and the messaging has been very consistent of every rider is working towards the same end goal. Every rider's on equal status, and if there is any staggering of development, both Goyon and Beirer said this, and this was already the case last year, although with the golden child Acosta, I guess, so take that in mind, but still, it will be determined who gets the newest stuff. If there's a limited amount of newest stuff, it will be determined by the point standings. It will be determined by championship prospects rather than by KTM versus Tech 3 status. So, I mean, I have no reason not to believe that. It's just, again, that does tie back to the point I made earlier of, look at this manufacturing trouble and its lineup of 4 factory bikes in the same factory livery, I guess.
Completely.
It's quite something.
And as well, I think, sorry, Vinales, but that stance of I'll be left in peace, not develop too much on the satellite bike. You and Bastianini, the guys who've been hired because you've come from other manufacturers and can bring knowledge. Therefore, I can see you doing quite a lot of back-to-back work. So you can give them a few hints about how that compares to Ducati or Aprilia. I think their clipboard of stuff might be quite long.
Well, serving as advocate, is it possible that he meant in this upcoming preseason, because my job's just to learn the bike?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Because that would make sense to me.
Yeah. Either way, listeners, if you're looking for ways to tell the 4 KTMs apart during the season, Vinales will be the one that starts second and is 18th after the first corner. So that should help you.
I've already seen that same joke on Twitter. I know you're not on Twitter. Also, Twitter doesn't exist anymore as a concept. But I just want you to know that somebody beat you to that joke.
Well, I'm not stunned. It wasn't that funny. Anyway, Val was shaking his head at me then, listeners. We mentioned Simon isn't with us for this one because he missed all the KTM fun while flying out to Thailand for Yamaha Pros Plamac, followed by Honda, followed by testing, and then LCR Honda, and the MotoGP launch. Basically, we're into full-on test season. As part of that, you'll be able to hear, if you're in the Race Members Club on Patreon, you'll be able to hear our one-on-one with Jack Miller, where we throw all your questions at him. I'm hoping that Simon can kind of like tie him to a chair or something for a little while to get through all these questions, because the array of stuff, members, that you've thrown in for us to put to Jack is absolutely fantastic, including Simon having to ask him if he's aware how much of a rough ride he gets on this podcast. So we'll see if that one squeezes in. I hope Simon does ask that one.
Is it true that Yamaha's before Honda? Because that makes a difference to me, because I haven't paid any attention. As always,
I think it's Yamaha first, but now you've got me doubting that. Let's check this after this podcast. I'm never confident in Val's ability to know which day of the week it is or what time it is. So which of the MotoGP teams' launches come first might be asking a lot. As well as Simon's one-on-one with Jack, we'll also have more behind-the-scenes stuff from Simon around his launch and testing adventures exclusively to the Race Members Club, and more episodes coming up soon of 2015 Revisited. Already the first 2, Qatar and Austin, are out there on Patreon. We'll take a little pause for pre-season 2025 testing and then come back with Argentina in a few weeks' time, which... bit of a juicy one. If you're rewatching it along with us, that's where things start getting a little bit spicy. Back to 2025, and the other change that's kind of not been forgotten as such, but there's been so much going on at KTM around its riders, its finances and stuff. Change of team boss in the factory lineup with Aki Ajo, very familiar MotoGP figure through his enormous success with his team in the lower categories, rider manager as well. Somebody who's a MotoGP figure without having been in MotoGP until now. He was guarded-ish / stereotypically Finnish in his responses to the media during the KTM launch, Val. I thought he played things with a very straight bat. But one thing that stood out was how strong he was on suggesting that there's not actually a lot KTM needs to do to be really competitive now. And it's not really about the new parts coming for the bike. It's actually about executing properly and making weekends work better. And actually, a lot of stuff I can imagine Ajo really being a good final piece in the puzzle for.
I mean, on the one hand, that is a convenient stance to take for a manufacturer that potentially has, financial difficulties.
True.
But all the things that we need are already in place, so all good. We can win without having to spend much more. Obviously, I'm not saying that's the reason for it. I genuinely 100% believe that Aki Ajo has come in, has had a look at the team and saw some areas of, I don't know, it's hard to say what exactly, because he didn't really elaborate on what specific areas, specific moments, as maybe you wouldn't expect him to. He didn't really say, this is what last year we did specifically wrong, where X amount of points or X amount of lap time was being lost, etc., etc. Again, I guess you would not tell that to the media. But I think just generally, it's a question of rider management. It's a question of weekend execution. It's a question of, getting to the right setup in the right amount of time, which two very strong riders coming into the lineup and even more cooperation between KTM and Tech 3 will help you get there. Ducati has taught you that's a good model to follow generally through the weekend. It is an interesting way to look at it. It was also echoed, and I think it's been echoed for a little bit now by Brad Binder, that it's small pieces and it's getting the most out of them. KTM has long existed in these two, publicly at least, in these two competing ideas of bring a lot and just run through it and just outdevelop everybody by, spending and bringing and spending and bringing and testing and testing and testing, or actually try to get the most of what you already have and ensure that, maybe the theoretical lap time coming through the equipment that you have maybe is lower, but you get a bigger chance of your riders accessing it more frequently, which ultimately, theoretical lap time obviously does not matter, does it? It's not how the points are scored. I mean, you could have the best bike in the world theoretically, but if it doesn't finish a lap, who cares? Whatever. But it's not, we're really simplifying it, but it did sound like that was sort of the crux of Ajo's message. Is he didn't say low-hanging fruit, and when I tried to get him to kind of say it, he didn't really bite, but it did sound like what he was trying to convey is, operationally and in other, specifically in rider management and all that, there is more that can be squeezed out from what's already in place without having to revolutionize the bike, revolutionize the aero of it, whatever, etc.
Yeah, and I think that really tallies with KTM's form over the last couple of years. They've, in some ways, been the kind of least predictable manufacturer in a way. Like, you kind of knew what you were getting with Aprilia. They'd be quick on certain tracks. Sometimes they'd catch fire. You knew that Ducati would be quick. You knew that Honda and Yamaha right now wouldn't be. KTM would have these odd pre-season tests where you think they're really in trouble and then suddenly look great, or weekends when you forgot they were there but the previous weekend they'd been really good. You couldn't really go, oh, it's not their track, it's just what have they not put together this weekend? And the riders maybe haven't helped. Certainly last year, you just look at the situation and go, okay, if Pedro Acosta had a little bit more experience to execute races a bit more cleanly, he's winning races. Brad Binder, I checked this just quickly just now. I didn't realize Brad Binder hasn't. Acosta, I think, has more front row starts in MotoGP than Brad Binder already, or they're on the same number. I think it's three for.
Sounds plausible, yeah.
Yeah, there's three for Acosta, two for Binder, I think, based on my quick count. And Brad Binder has been the best non-Ducati, or nearly that, in the championship for the last few years, which just shows how much he's losing in qualifying or how much he's pulling back in racecraft. But you look at Acosta's sheer speed and you think, okay, I think Binder's losing that in qualifying. And but is that him, or is that not getting through the weekend cleanly enough? Is that too much development or setup fiddling earlier on, not getting a clear enough run at just bringing that pace out over a single lap? When you look at all those elements, you go, okay, yeah, there's there is just a few percent to find here, and this will be fine. But then you go, I feel like we've said that for a few years and it's been the same.
Yeah, I agree. But also, it's tempting to look at it that way, but there's a part of me that isn't entirely convinced that cleaning up the margins, etc., streamlining the weekends, turns a 0-win manufacturer into a 19-win manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
So that's the part of it that doesn't quite compute in my head right now. I think if KTM does take a giant leap this year, this is, just me going out on a limb, the only way I really see that happening without a major development step is if Acosta does a second-year Marc Marquez 2014.
Yeah.
Like if he's just a rider who's suddenly so much quicker than he was before, and he already was quite quick. If he's just a supernova, basically, if he goes nuclear, then yes, absolutely. Then you're in position to really, really benefit and capitalize from that. And maybe part of that is sort of at the back of Aki Ajo's mind. I would not be surprised. But yes, KTM is peaky, but I think when you're looking at a manufacturer that you just feel isn't putting everything together often enough, when you're not winning a single time in a season, I don't know. I don't think there's quite enough baseline in the package as it is. That would be my hunch. Because they had 40 attempts. And yeah, a few of those attempts, maybe like a couple or 2 or 3, went by the wayside. But when you're like on the cusp of that next step, in 40 attempts, I think you're going to win at least once. Maybe that's slightly anecdotal, but that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I also feel like even if KTM does that bit of tidying up, that means at best KTM gets ahead of Aprilia more often than not. It's not just like it's been on the cusp and it's been wide open and that final step, like you say, brings it to wins and championships. It's got this massive Ducati monster that's marching across season after season and now has Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia as its factory lineup. I was surprised how many questions during the launch were about championship hopes, as if that was an obvious thing to be asking at KTM right now. And even if you take away the financial situation, KTM, like you say, is a 0 wins manufacturer recently, and a lot of the wins it has had have come in the rain, in strange circumstances. It's on the cusp in some ways. It's been best non-Ducati with Binder for a while in the final championship standings. It's got this amazing talent in the Costa, but you could be quite easily deceived by all that and then look at the results and go, oh yeah, it's actually still got a massive leap before it can be the sort of team that people seem to think it is a lot of the time, that it should be like this championship success.
Well, that sort of motivated some of the questions I was asking, because again, axiomatically approaching it from where I'm standing, if there's a manufacturer that finished 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in a race last season, for me, like I almost approach this from, I'm not sure you can undo this in one off season.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. There's it doesn't feel like there's definitively enough time, but I got some pushback to that idea from both Acosta and Binder. Binder said that, what the gap is and what it has looked like from the analysis they've had is not as big as it maybe seems. He didn't really get to elaborate on that, and he didn't name a figure, and I'd like to know. I'd love to know how they calculate it. I'd love it. Would love nothing more, because it's got to be like, what is it? Qualifying gap, race gap, what kind of conditions, what kind of tracks, etc., etc. Just can't wait to find out one day. But it's felt like a big gap. I mean, that's the point he's making. But the results have showed it to be a big gap. But also every weekend, just I guess what will drive him on, and we're getting a bit into season preview, so I shouldn't speak too much about that, but it did sort of feel like it ballooned as weekends progressed, right? And that's where you'd say having 8 Ducatis, which are now 6, so that'll be a reduction, but that's where you say having 8 Ducatis played into their strength, and that's where you say having this new KTM super team, I called it the Fantastic Four, which I guess makes one of them Brick. Right. Yeah, but Beirer, I said, called it the 4 Diamonds, which is not a particularly impressive card, is it? Anyway. Yeah. 2 one-liners for the price of 1.
Yeah,
cool.
Absolutely. Good work, Val.
Yeah.
Who needs Simon? Yeah, thread lost there. Thank you. No, you're right. Looking at sheer championship standings as well. It's KTM was like 400 odd points behind Ducati last season. It's fine to go, yes, this lineup has taken a step forward in its strength and depth. It's fine to go, actually, we're still fighting, we're still developing, even though we've got this financial situation. It's then a big step to go, yeah, we're going to be beating the Marquez Bagnaia Ducati factory team to titles, and Martin and Aprilia, they've got no hope against us. I think we need to... So KTM looks like it can do more than just survive this year. I'm really intrigued to see Acosta in the second year. Like you say, if this is a Marquez year 2 arrangement in terms of how he progresses, obviously he's not got the 2014 Honda equivalent underneath him. I'm really intrigued to see Binder bouncing back over a full season after actually getting back in front of Acosta in the points. And I'm absolutely fascinated to see how Viñales, who I mock a lot on this podcast, but I do believe is like talent-wise incredible when things are right, and Bastianini, who I had such high hopes for in the Works Ducati team, and can we look back on that in a year's time and go, okay, that was an anomaly based on that bike and that team. This is still like Grissini spec Bastianini. There's so much about this lineup that is just tantalizing and brilliant. And actually, maybe it's partly down to that we cannot speak about Pyrrho Mobility on behalf of Pyrrho Mobility rule, but it was really quite nice to listen to all these interviews today and get to be chatting through it at the end and go, oh, we've not just talked about billions of euros of debt here. We've not just talked about redundancies. We've actually looked at this team and gone, this could do something quite exciting this season, even if that's not the championship hope that a few of the questions at the launch were suggesting should be its target. We're sort of ending on a feel-good KTM note, and I don't think we'd have expected that from the KTM launch if we'd been looking ahead to it a few weeks ago.
We're too tired to be jaded about it. We're too tired to be cynical. That's what fatigue does.
That's not a normal human response, is it? Or is that because Simon's not here? He gets pretty cynical when he's tired.
Potentially. I like it. No comment.
Simon revealed in a planning meeting that he's not actually the most avid listener of this podcast, so we could probably say whatever we liked about him in his absence.
I wasn't going to mention that.
Ever know. So.
I wasn't. I mean, that part might still get cut, but if it doesn't get cut, I just wanted to know. I wasn't going to mention that, and then you did it, and now I find it really funny.
Producer Johnny, don't cut that part. Listeners, which don't include Simon, it turns out, we will be back early next week on Monday with another bumper pod covering the Honda and Yamaha launches, which are taking place in some order, which Val is now off to check. I think it's Yamaha first. Thank you for your patience. Please do join us in the Members Club if you haven't already for 2015 antics and Jack Miller one-on-ones. We'll be back in your ears talking about Miller and other Honda and Yamaha riders very soon.
The Athletic.
Hello, I'm Ian McIntosh and I'm the host of the Daily Football Briefing. What is the Daily Football Briefing? It's a special 10-minute daily show designed to bring you up to speed with the most important stories from across the football world. Except on Monday mornings when it's 15 minutes and we try to cram in the results, standings and stories from the top 10 leagues on the planet. Or at least the top 10 leagues that I run on a Football Manager save. Follow this show today and you'll never miss another big story again, whether it's news that the Athletic has just broken. David Ornstein, what happened? News from outside the Premier League that other podcasts might ignore.
That is a difficult one to explain, so let's go bit by bit.
Or it's Champions League week and you just need someone to put it all into context.
It's made for a very useful away point in a difficult game in a difficult week.
Listen to the Daily Football Briefing in 2025. It's out every weekday wherever you get your podcasts.